All right. So let's get started.
Tonight we went through a whole thing with us. We have one of the portable ones with us, so when we were on vacation, we were obviously using those like to fit in the case.
Yeah.
And I think at one point we had it in one of my carry-on bags, and the security guys looked at it and they couldn't quite figure out what it was. It was sort of like, it's not dangerous, but we don't understand what we're looking at, because they were just seeing the outline of what it was. Oh, really nondescript, but it was like, why do you have a metal plate like this sitting in there?
An unusual carry-on.
Carry-on.
Checked item, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm glad this is here, tonight's visual aid for tonight. We're going to be talking about, this is our Chanukah class for this year. We're going to be talking about lighting the menorah. And many of us are familiar with what's the method for lighting the Chanukah menorah, lighting the candles. So tonight you can tell from looking at it what night we're holding by. It's the fifth light of Chanukah. And you can tell this because there's 5 candles lit. And the way we've been doing it is 1 candle on the first night, and then 2 the second night, and 3 the fourth night, and 3 the third night, 4 the fourth night, and so on and so on. So what people don't realize, perhaps, when we light the candles of Chanukah, is that this is actually a matter of debate.
Yeah.
How we go about lighting the menorah is a matter of debate. And we can trace at least one side of this debate. We can trace one of the arguments all the way back to the academies of Hillel and Shammai. So we'll call it Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Now, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai have an argument about the way that we light the menorah. One opinion, which is the one we follow, says on the first night we start with 1, and we work our way all the way till the end of Chanukah when we have 8 candles on the 8th night. The other opinion is that we do it the other way. We start from 8 candles on the first night, and then decrease by 1 candle until you get to the end of Chanukah, and there's only 1 candle. Now, with this debate clearly has been settled. You don't see that people are choosing really. We had a resolution to this debate. The debate is over 2,000 years old. It's from the year 165 BCE, so 2,182 years ago. And it's an argument between, like I said, Hillel and Shammai.
How far after the Maccabees was that?
How far after the Maccabees? So the Maccabees were in the middle of the Second Temple.
Right.
And this is after the destruction of the temple.
So it's maybe 100, 200 years later.
Yeah. So we have one way of lighting 1 candle as we go, or we light 1 less candle as we go. Now, these arguments between Hillel and Shammai, there are actually over 300 arguments between the Academy of Hillel and the Academy of Shammai, over 300 such arguments throughout the totality of the Talmud. They argue, many, many times, and this is one of the 300 plus arguments about how to go about lighting the Chanukah menorah. So what we're going to try to understand for tonight, and looking at it from a few different perspectives, a few different ways, is what is the basis for this debate? What exactly is being debated when we go either from 1 to 8 or from 8 to 1? And we're going to go all over the place. We're going to talk about their personalities. We're going to talk about their soul root. We're going to talk about how inside of this debate is a whole worldview. We're even going to take a little digression into the world of modern psychology and talk about some insight from this debate. We're going to really delve into what's behind this debate. Now, the point for tonight, what we hope to come away with, is there's plenty of symbolism in Chanukah, right? One of the simple concepts we find in this symbolic understanding of Chanukah is darkness and light, and how light repels darkness. I mean, there's many philosophical and artistic and different things about this, about how good and evil is represented by dark and light, and how the light of good can push away the darkness of evil, and the light of truth can push away the darkness of falsehood. And there's lots of layers to understand these symbolic images or symbolic meaning of the holiday. So for the lesson, what we hope to come across is how to approach our personal darkness. Once can we uncover something behind this debate that will, excuse the pun, shed light on how we encounter and how we deal with our own personal darkness. Okay, so the original text, the first text for tonight, text 1a, is from the Talmud, tractate Shabbos. Now this is the tractate. There is no tractate for Chanukah. Chanukah is, of all the holidays, it does not have its own Masechta, its own tractate in the Talmud. It's included within the topics covered in the tractate of Shabbos. So here, that's where we find ourselves, how the Talmud discusses Chanukah, and it says, our rabbis taught that the mitzvah of Chanukah demands one light for a man and his household. All right, so this is not how we do it, right? If the mitzvah of Chanukah, it would be sufficient to light one candle a night. For everybody who's obligated in mitzvahs, age of majority is a time-based mitzvah, so women are exempt. So all men could satisfy the obligation of Chanukah for the mitzvah by lighting one candle a night for 8 nights. Now, those who beautify the mitzvah, the Talmud continues, those who do it mahadran, they will light a light for each member of the household. So in my house, so the first opinion would be I would just light one candle a night just for me, and then that would be it. My son Zalman would light one candle, and that one a night. That's it, and that's the entire mitzvah. This first way of beautifying the mitzvah would be for me to light one for every member of the household. So that would include my wife and my daughters and all my children. So there would be one candle each night for all of them. Now, concerning those who beautify it more than that, so mahadran mina mahadran, like the highest level, Beis Shammai says on the first night light 8, and after that gradually reduce. Beis Hillel says on the first day one is lit, and thereafter they're progressively increased. So the most beautiful way to do it is to change in some way the number of candles that are lit each night. And whichever direction that change goes, that's a matter of debate between Hillel and Shammai. So let's do a quick review. Because we learned there's 3 ways to do this mitzvah. One is one candle a night per adult male. Done. The next opinion, or next way of doing it, which is more beautiful, is one candle per night for each person in the household. Step number 3, the third way you could do it, the most beautiful way, is every night for each person in the household, light a different number of candles. There's 2 directions you could go. They would be a different number. Either you could go from 8 down towards 1, that's the opinion of Beis Shammai, or you could go from 1 up to 8, that's the opinion of Hillel. Now, what's the disagreement? Why the disagreement? This is where the Talmud continues with our next text for tonight, text 1b, which is from the same place, and tractate Shabbos. It says, some of the reasoning behind it says like as follows. Ula said, in Israel, 2 scholars, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Avin, and Rabbi Yossi, the son of Zevida, these 2 Rabbi Yossis, they argue. Now their argument is that one Yossi says the reason of Beis Shammai is that it should correspond to the days still to come. And the reason of Beis Hillel is that it should correspond to the days that have already passed. So it's like, which direction is the arrow of time going, right? That's the way you could explain this argument. The other scholar, the second Rabbi Yossi, he maintains that Beis Shammai's reason is that it should correspond to the bull's offering of Sukkot, while Beis Hillel's reason is that we increase in matters of sanctity, but never to decrease. So what this second text from the Talmud is saying is that we have really 2 different types of arguments, which is how we could explain what's behind the argument of Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai are going in opposite directions and with the numbers of the candles, but why? What's behind the argument? And we have 2 different types. One type of argument, again, is like which way does the arrow of time point? Which way are we going? What's left to go? Or where have we already been? And then the second opinion is no. It's an argument about, let's call it biblical precedent. See, Chanukah, the performance of Chanukah is rabbinic enactment. it becomes the strength of a mitzvah. We make a blessing as if God commanded us to do this, but this is one of the 7 mitzvahs from the rabbis. So the second type of argument, the way that this Rabbi Yossi is explaining Hillel and Shammai, is saying, what's the biblical precedent that we're following in order to know which way to go with our Chanukah candles? So by Shammai, who says 8 down to 1, so we see a precedent for this biblically by the sacrifices during Sukkot. We offer 70 bulls over the course of the holiday of Sukkot, and these 70 bulls are corresponding to the 70 nations of the world. We pray for their well-being as well on Sukkot. And we have a whole special sacrifice in the temple just in honor of the nations of the world. And you start with a large number, and you work your way down. You start with, in order to get to 40. So, do we follow that model? That's what Shammai says. Or do we follow a different biblical principle, which is the concept of Mylin b'kodesh v'loy meridin. We elevate, we go up in matters of holiness. We always do more. We never do less. This is the biblical principle that as you take on more and more, and you go up in matters of holiness, you always do more, you don't do less. So which model of thinking, which biblical precedent is applied? That's the second way of understanding the argument between Hillel and Shammai. All right. That's introducing you to the argument, Hillel and Shammai, and where it's rooted from in the Mishnah. And, as I said, this is an argument going back a couple thousand of years. So for us tonight, what we're going to try to do is, after we've introduced this in text 1a and 1b, is then to try to understand, is there some deeper underlying motivation behind this argument? Could we add a few more layers to the onion, so to say? We presented the argument. We gave the first 2 explanations of what type of argument this is. I'm going to add about 3 more layers to understand what's really behind all of this. All right. So the first layer we're going to add is, let's call this personality. That, how if you could generalize or briefly describe a person's personality, based on what you know about their personality, you can almost predict their future behavior, right? Meaning, if somebody is, by personality, generous, and you know that it's coming time for end-of-the-year charitable donations, people are going around asking for help for this or that cause. If you know a person's personality, you can almost predict what's going to happen when they get the ask, right? Someone comes to them and says, could you help out our cause? If you know them to be generous, you can predict that they're going to give. If you know them to be miserly, you know that it's going to be a bad experience for the person who comes and asks, right? Because their personality kind of dictates the way they're going to react to certain things. So one layer behind the argument between Hillel and Shammai is by saying, is this reflective, or could this have been predicted based on their personality? Could we explain the difference between Hillel and Shammai based on personality? Now, throughout the Talmud, there are many commentaries, let's say, or many ways of reading the Talmud, which try to explain it this way. The difference between Hillel and Shammai is a matter of personality. Shammai is stern and strict, and Hillel is more lenient, more compassionate between the two. And this is a personality type which attracts certain followers and sees the world in a certain way. So there's a famous story, this might be the most famous story of Hillel and Shammai and their arguments. Okay, now that I throw it out there, what do you think it's about? What's the famous story of Hillel and Shammai?
Wasn't that the one about doing something until he dies?
Okay.
No, was that them? Where they drank until they...
Oh, that was
different people.
Yeah, different. Zera, or Rabban of Zera. Yeah, we learned that together around Purim time.
Yeah.
Hillel and Shammai, famous Hillel and Shammai argument.
Just remember that the argument won because of the number of people voting, or
Yeah, that's
only
right.
because of that.
That's right.
But I don't remember.
Majority rules, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
but I don't remember that.
Maybe instead of an argument, I say it's like a famous story that they reacted differently to. Maybe an argument is setting you guys down the wrong path of thinking. Anything from home? The famous Hillel and Shammai
Is this one
story.
about learning the Torah?
Learning so good.
That's one of them.
Yeah, learning the Torah. Okay, elaborate. Which one do you mean?
There's another one, another debate that they had too.
Oh, hold on. Get from home. The convert story. Very good. I'm glad I asked for help from home. So the convert story is correct. That's the story I'm looking for. Now, there's a personality difference between Hillel and Shammai. So this is our Hillel image, the heart, a loving guy, compassionate. And our Shammai is the one flexing his muscles to show how stern, strict he is, right? So let's look at the story. The story is also from Tractate Shabbos. This is the famous convert story, as she said, from home. It happened that a certain non-Jew came before Shammai and said to him, "Convert me on the condition that you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot." Meaning, I'm ready to convert, and if you can tell me what it's all about, standing on one foot, let's do it. So what was Shammai's reaction? He chased him away with a builder's measuring tool. I think that means a big ruler, and that was in his hand. And get out of here. The same fellow came before Hillel, and Hillel converted him, saying, "That which is despicable to you, do not do to your fellow. This is the whole Torah, and the rest is commentary. Go and learn it." So if we were to go back to our simple images, of how to explain whose personality is who, Shammai was very stern and strict. He reacted in a way which was harsh to this would-be convert. And Hillel was embracing, compassionate, gave him a very profound but simplistic answer for how to go forward. So now, these personality differences are, some rabbis want to suggest, reflected in the halachic rulings. Shammai, because he's so strict, rules strictly. And Hillel, because he's so compassionate, rules leniently. And thanks to a simple majority, Hillel's side always seems to win. Now, this idea, we'll talk about who wins more often than not, maybe different times, but this idea that Hillel is lenient and Shammai is strict is such an ironclad rule in Talmud. The Mishnah tells us there's only 2 exceptions. Remember, you're talking about over 300 arguments throughout Talmud. And of all the 300 plus, 2 go the other way, where Shammai is lenient and Hillel is strict. So let's see that. Text number 3. The following are instances where Beis Shammai is more lenient and Beis Hillel is more strict. Number 1, an egg that was laid on a festival. Beis Shammai says it may be eaten on the festival, and Beis Hillel says it may not be eaten, so he's more strict there. Beis Shammai says a person is liable for a violation of Passover eating prohibition with just an olive-sized portion of leaven, of yeast, and a date-sized portion of leaven product. Beis Hillel says with an olive-sized portion of each, either that made with yeast or that which is leavened. So that's a more strict opinion in like the minimum required amount for a prohibition. So but the idea of bringing this text here, text number 3, is merely to illustrate how this is fixed, that Hillel is the lenient one and Shammai is strict, because out of 300 plus, only twice does it flip around, and Shammai is more lenient. Now, I said we're going to come back. Hillel is usually the opinion that we follow. Now, again, this is a lot of times a simple majority. Why that is, because we have 2 arguments and they're well reasoned. You can't eliminate the other side. We take it to a vote, and whichever one gets the most votes wins. There's the day, which we've talked about before in previous classes, where Shammai managed to have more students in the academy than Hillel, so they rushed a whole bunch of legislation, to be decided while they had the majority. But if you would take this idea together, which is the halachic rulings are in line with their personality, and the lenient ruling is the one that's more often the halachic ruling. So can we put the two together? Can we overlap the two and say that it's because of the lenient, compassionate nature, that's why it's a more favorable halachic opinion? So the next text number 4, is from Talmud Tractate Eruvin, and it reads, for 3 years, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai argued. One said the halacha is like us, right? The other said the halacha is like us. A long-standing argument where they go back and forth. A heavenly voice spoke, these and these, meaning the opinions of both sides, are the words of the living God, and the halacha follows the house of Hillel. So, can you imagine? Wow, you're making this debate, and then all of a sudden God sides with you out loud. A question was raised. Since the heavenly voice declared both these and these are the words of the living God, then why was the halacha established to follow the opinion of Hillel? If they're both right, how could one be more right? It is because the students of Hillel were kind and gracious. They taught their own ideas as well as ideas from the students of Shammai. Not only that, they went so far as to teach Shammai's opinions first. So there is, according to this piece of Talmud and Tractate Eruvin, there is a way to layer the two. That their rulings are a matter of their personality, and the more lenient, compassionate personality lends itself better to the final opinion. So now, if we take these two ideas and that when we successfully layered them on top of each other, how can we then go back to our Chanukah debate and use personality to explain either going from 1 to 8, who's that?
Which is
Hillel, very good.
yeah, because is more.
So how does going from 1 to 8 demonstrate that the lenient, compassionate opinion?
Because going the other way would be, I was going to say more strict, but that's not valid. Would be that anything that is pious, anything that is more important, would have the priority, and you don't want to get less and less of it. So he was reading strictly in terms of if something's going to decrease, then it can't be something that's holy.
Okay. Now, I guess it's the same question, but from the other side. How does going from 8 to 1 illustrate a more strict opinion? Now, on the surface, they have nothing to do with each other. Seemingly, it's hard to initially come to an idea how changing the numbers from 1 to 8 or 8 to 1 would be illustrative of strict or lenient.
Wasn't his argument that once you were holy, but it doesn't, even though you like less candle, it doesn't decrease?
Well, these were the Rebbe Yossis who were trying to explain Hillel and Shammai. Remember, we had the two Rebbe Yossis who were trying to explain the two. So the second Rebbe Yossi said that according to Hillel's reasoning, the biblical precedent, that you go up in matters of holiness.
Right.
I have a theory.
You have a theory?
Yes.
Let's hear it.
Because it's simply because light is better than darkness.
Okay.
So increasing light is better than, so going towards more light is better than diminishing light and going into darkness.
Okay. So how does Shammai defend himself against that theory? What would his response be?
Well, that's the Hillel's response.
Right.
Just opposite, because his way is better.
His way is better, meaning it's better. Let's take out the word better and say lenient.
Lenient.
How is it lenient?
Better.
Lenient's better. Well, you're right.
Better.
Text number 4 is saying that right up there. When you're a nice person and lenient and compassionate, things just go better.
Right.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. That's how to read text number 4. But what makes it lenient to go from 1 to 8? What are you being lenient on? What's at stake? When you say something is let's say like this, say like you have an argument about something being pure or impure. So if you say there's certain factors would make something impure, if you would take a strict opinion, then it would make it easier for it to become impure. If you would take a lenient opinion, it would make it harder for it to become impure. Now, what's the stakes? Whether you could consume it or not, whether you can continue to use it. Something becomes impure, you can't consume it, you can't use it. So there's some stake.
Something going to relate to the oil that's required for the light.
So it could be the cost of the oil, but you end up using the same 44 candles every night, right?
But what God
for the whole period.
Yeah.
Maybe it takes them a little more time to process oil and make it.
So it makes you work harder at the front end or at the back end.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the front end. You don't
So
have to work
Hillel makes you work less in the front end.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
You don't have to have a reserve of
Right.
oil for
This
heat.
is like do you eat the dessert first or you wait till the end to eat dessert?
Right.
Do you structure your day that the hardest tasks are at the beginning or at the end of the day? It's a good,
Only if you have 8 candles in the beginning, you can start.
right. Okay.
That's strict.
So I'm going to add one more layer to the onion to help us. One more layer to the onion, which is like, while it's nice, it fits well. Text 4 makes sense to us when people are lenient and compassionate. It's better. But we're going to add a new way of thinking about the basis of the argument between Hillel and Shammai. Rather than being a matter of their personality, let's call it more like a matter of worldview. Meaning, there's a distinction, which the Rebbe explains, between Hillel and Shammai that says you can understand all of their arguments on the basis of potential versus reality. Which is most primary? Now, let me give you an example. You guys have ever been in the position to hire someone to work for you?
Yeah.
Like a hiring manager? Yeah? Okay. So if you're in the position of hiring someone, this is a way to kind of capture this as a worldview. Which is more important? The person's potential or the person's reality? Meaning, do you look at their strength that they have in potential that you could nurture? Or do you look at their accomplishments and all their experience, all the things that they've already done? Which is more important, potential or reality? So reality, meaning you would go with experience over...
Because it's easier to redirect somebody that's already moving.
Okay.
If you're already motioned, then I can always redirect you. Or if you've already done something, we can already, steer that another way. But if you're just there and you haven't done anything and don't know where your mind is, what your mindset is, it's hard to change that.
Okay, Baron, what do you
I would
think?
say, I tend to do slightly the opposite. It's sort of like what you did before you did for somebody else. Right. It's sort of like, I don't care what you did for somebody else. What can you do for me going forward? So the future potential seems to be more important than what the past is.
I agree
Depends
with
what
that.
you mean, I guess.
Especially since you
No,
want
I
to make
think
this
it depends
person the
what
right fit for what this
Right.
particular job.
So you're saying it depends. It's
It depends on the
contextually
job.
dependent. Certain things you would want experience, whereas other things you would want potential.
Yeah, the potential that potentially can realize that potential and exactly mold it into the form that they
Right.
want for this particular.
There might be a difference, like of time pressure. If I have a long timeline for something, I'll allow potential to mature. But if I have a short timeline, I need it now, I would rather use the experience.
And if I'm a contractor.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want an experienced
Yeah.
contractor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So this,
You got a note up there?
the compassion is expansive, while sternness contracts as a
Interesting.
question mark.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Okay, very good. So this theme, potential versus practical, that Rebbe explains is the underlying factor behind all of the arguments between Hillel and Shammai. So let's see the next text. This is from L'Kutei Sichos, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It says, we find many arguments between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel where the fundamental dispute is this. Beis Shammai maintains that we focus on the potential, whereas Beis Hillel counters that we focus on the practical. Now we're going to show two examples that the Rebbe actually, when he teaches this in L'Kutei Sichos, brings a whole lot of examples. We're only going to bring two. One from like the really abstract example side of the spectrum, and then one from a very more practical and simpler example. So the first example will be abstract. The example is creation. Is it better to be created or not? That's what I mean by abstract, and maybe. So for the abstract example is creation. Is it good? Is it better to be created or not? And then the other example, which will be more mundane and more and simple, is when does the act, at what point when you extract honey from a honeycomb does it become liquid? Prior to the beginning of the extraction, a honeycomb is considered a solid. But once you begin pulling the honey out of the honeycomb, now the honey by itself is a liquid. And there's different laws in the realm of impurity between a solid and a liquid. So at what point in the stage does honey become a thing? Honey become liquid. So between these two examples that are again brought of many, we'll be able to understand how they're both can be understood through this lens of potential versus reality. All right, so let's see the first, and there's our image. Which one is the heart of Hillel, and which one is the strength of Shammai? Okay, so text number 6, Talmud tractate Eruvin. Again, it says, our rabbis taught for 2.5 years. The school of Shammai and the school of Hillel were in dispute. Another long-term debate. The former asserting that it were better for man not to have been created than to have been created, and the latter maintaining that it is better for man to have been created than to not have been created. This is a heavy debate. Is it better that we exist, or is it better that we never existed? Is it better, what's at stake here, between this debate? And how can we understand this through the potential versus reality, spectrum or filter? Which side's which? Now, the next text is the Rebbe, which we'll read through this and explain it. It says, the creation of man, this matter of debate. In this context, creation refers to the descent of the soul into the physical world. I mean, you could say creation in a lot of different ways. You could say something from nothing. You could say creation in the large scheme of all of creation. So here, when we talk about creation of man, we mean specifically when the soul comes down into the body to enliven it. That's what we mean by creation. So the dispute of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is in accordance with their respective views about whether we measure by potential or by the actual. So here's the Rebbe's explanation. According to Beis Shammai, for whom the potential is sufficient, in order for the soul to attain perfection, there is no need for the soul to actually descend to this world and actually physically engage in Torah and mitzvahs. For even when it is on high, it has the potential to do all of that thing. And if potential is enough, merely having the requisite potential renders the soul complete. Even before you did it. As long as you could do it, that's enough. The only reason why the soul actually descended to the physical world was for some other reason. God desired it, but not for the own benefit of the soul, and therefore it's better not to come down. Thus, Beis Shammai maintains that it would have been better for man not to be created for the purpose of this creation, namely the descent of the soul. It's strictly to fulfill the will of God, but for the person, he or she would be better off without it. Contrarily, according to Beis Hillel, who focuses on the actual, in order for man to attain perfection, his soul must actually descend to this world and actually perform physical mitzvahs and actually study the Torah in its earthly form. Thus, Beis Hillel maintains that the soul is pleased with creation, for the creation of man not only fulfills God's will, but it also benefits the soul itself. So this is, again, this is about as abstract as you can get. This is a real philosophy department kind of debate. Is it better to exist or not to exist? And well, what's the purpose of existence? And how do we measure what's at stake if we exist or not? So here we're saying, if the purpose is to change the world, then you have to actually go out and do it. But if the purpose is that you could change the world, then you don't actually have to go out and do it. If you don't actually go out and do it, it would be better not to have to go through all the struggle and difficulty of actually being created. So it's a fascinating thing we can understand through potential versus reality. Now, one of the examples which Larry brings, less abstract, very concrete, is could be a before and after question. When does the transition take place from solid to liquid when we're dealing with a honeycomb? So again, a much more practical example. Let's see the next slide. The Mishnah and Upson. When do honeycombs become susceptible to being rendered impure as liquids? So Beis Shammai says once one stirs it up, meaning once you get the bees excited by smoking them out of the honeycomb, you've already indicated your desire to extract the honey. It's already a liquid. Beis Hillel says once you start breaking it apart, it's not just enough to smoke the bees out, you actually have to start breaking the honeycomb and getting the actual honey out of it. So here again, you can understand it much more simply, the difference between potential and reality. Shammai is saying, as soon as you've indicated that you're interested, you didn't actually start extracting honey, but you did the initial steps, that's already enough to make it impure like a liquid. But Hillel says no, it has to be reality. Only once we begin the process of extraction, that's when it becomes a liquid. All right, so we had personality. Personality is expressed through lenient versus strict. Lenient being more pleasing, and that's the majority opinion. Now we said, well, that's hard to understand how that would be understood, manifest in 1 to 8 versus 8 to 1. So instead, let's talk about it from a perspective of potential versus reality. Now, a matter of worldview, let's say. Let's add one more layer to the onion, go one layer deeper. Here is a more Hasidic explanation. What's the basis for their argument? It kind of is the sole root for how the personality is manifest. So what that means, it kind of gives you, depending on how you look at it, either it gives you an excuse, let's say. Don't blame me for how I'm strict. It's just where my soul comes from, Or you can be humble and say, I can't take any credit for being generous. It's the root of my soul, and how else would I be? So this Hasidic layer is to try to explain that the argument between Hillel and Shammai is really a manifestation of two completely different soul roots. What is the source of the soul? Where do they come from? And as a result of where the soul comes from, that's how we can understand their debate. So that's text number 9. Oops. Text number 9, this is from Tanya, Igeres HaKodesh, from the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. It says, among divine servants, there are 2 degrees and levels which, depending on the root of their souls above, are distinct in relation to the categories of right and left. So we've had strict, lenient, kind, severe, potential, reality. Now it's a matter of right and left. That is, the characteristic of the left is the trait of contraction, symptom, and concealment in divine service. From this attribute derives also the aspect of contraction and limitation in divine service. For example, with charity, to judge according to the means. And it quotes, he who expends should not expend more than 1/5. There's a limit. Likewise, in regards to study of Torah and other commandments, he makes do with discharging his duty, the definite duty to which the Torah obliges him to appoint 6 times, to do everything, to the letter of the law, so to say. That's the left. By contrast, the characteristic of the right is the attribute of grace, of chesed, an extension in divine service, by way of expansion, without any contraction and concealment whatsoever. There is no restraint to the spirit of his generosity, whether it be with respect to charity, meaning you'll give more than you have to. Even if you reach the limit, you'll keep giving. Study of Torah, it's not enough to suffice with 1 chapter a day and 1 in the morning, 1 at night. You just learn and learn. The other commandments, you don't just do what you have to do, you do without a limit. He does not suffice in discharging his obligation only, but to the extent of never sufficient. It's never enough. So the root of Beis Shammai's soul is the category of the supernal left. That is why they always decided stringently as regard to all the prohibitions of the Torah. But Beis Hillel, who were the supernal right, would find favorable arguments to be lenient and to permit the injunctions of Beis Shammai. So the Alter Rebbe gives us, from his lofty perspective, the Alter Rebbe gives us a glimpse into the root of their souls. And so we can categorize people based on where their soul comes from. This is a real matter of right soul versus left soul. So,
Sounds a little like some things from the Rebbe, where someone would come to him and said, well, we did this. And he would say, yeah, but now you got to do more. There was
right.
always, don't be limited. There's always more, even if you did less.
Right. So Rebbe was a right-sided soul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, very good. So, speaking of the Rebbe, I didn't switch the thing over. When you guys didn't see the Rebbe, you had it in front of you. Okay, so those listening at home, I'm behind a slide. All right, so text 10, the next text, is from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he helps us kind of understand the same idea of your behavior, your ruling, your worldview being a manifestation of your soul root. So it reads, the root of Beis Shammai's soul is in the supernal attribute of Gevurah, and Beis Hillel is rooted in Chesed. Thus Beis Shammai is stricter, and Beis Hillel is more lenient. Gevurah is generally associated with concealment, while Chesed is generally associated with revelation. So, accordingly, Beis Shammai focuses on the potential, and Beis Hillel focuses on the practical, where potential is the concealed state, while practical is the revealed state. So now the Rebbe took his novel approach before, which was potential versus reality, and overlapped that with the Alter Rebbe's explanation. This is a matter of soul root. Soul root on the left is concealment, and if you're okay with things that are hidden, then you're comfortable with potential. The right side, which is expansion and revelation, that it overlaps nicely with reality. It's not enough that it's potential and it's hidden still, and a revealed chesed side, the right side approach, it needs to be in reality, and that layers the two explanations. Now, this gives us an insight, let's say, to why we go from 1 to 8 or from 8 to 1. Now we have an explanation which, for all the overlaps and all the layers, begins to give us a clear understanding why Hillel would say 1 to 8 and why Shammai would say 8 to 1. Because Shammai says in potential we have 8 nights ahead of us, so we'll start with 8 and work our way down because the potential is diminishing. And Hillel says, no, in reality, this is the first night. We only light 1. And tomorrow, the reality is this is the second night, so we light 2. And in reality, it's the third night, so we light 3. So potential decreases from 8 to 1. In reality, increases from 1 to 8. So with all these layers, we understood the first explanation of our Yossis. Remember, one Yossi said it was just a matter of which direction the arrow of time is pointing. Our second Yossi said, no, we're looking for biblical precedent. One says, like Sukkot, that's Shammai. And one says, it's like we go up in holiness and not down, that's Hillel. Okay, you guys lost some of the layers yet? In Michigan, it's a good idea when it gets cold outside, you're supposed to get layered, you know, so. Chanukah class. That layered. Okay, so.
It still contradicts in my head. Maybe you can make it more like
straight.
If somebody is lenient, that seems to me more like potential, not reality. If somebody is more strict, and only if it's real, then it's strict, then it's more like a reality, not potential.
Right. So let me see if I can help
And
make it.
Opposite.
Yeah. Let's see if this will help. When the Rebbe tells us that it's a matter of potential versus reality, he's not saying that in contrast to it's lenient versus strict. The Rebbe is coming with another way of understanding it because lenient versus strict doesn't explain every argument.
Mm-hmm.
See and Chanukah is like one such example. Chanukah, 1 to 8 versus 8 to 1, because you're lighting 44 candles no matter which direction you go in, there's really not a clear illustration of lenient versus strict.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not either or so much as that there's a limitation to that explanation.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't explain Chanukah. So the Rebbe says, if we take a further step back and look at all the arguments and try to understand, is there one way which will answer all the arguments, potential versus reality doesn't have the same limitations that strict versus lenient has. It's a better explanation. It's more, it'll cover more of the argument. So once we presented this new way of thinking, potential versus reality, then we could put it onto Chanukah and we could see it.
So Gevura, it's because it's concealment, so it's like diminishing.
Right.
And Hesed is extension.
Right.
And that's why.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, see, Chesed, so you said Gevura. So Gevura, because it's concealing, is comfortable, let's say, in the concealment. Potential, by its definition, is concealed. It hasn't yet been revealed. So Gevura is comfortable with potential. And so that's where we can, that's what I mean by it's not either or the explanations. They're complementary. They layer over each other very nicely. And then just the potential versus reality has the advantage of being able to explain more. Does that help?
Yeah, a little better.
A little bit? Okay, any other questions?
The menorah in the temple had 7,
The menorah in the temple has 7 branches.
and the one in front here has 8 or 9.
9. 4 on each side plus the one.
So the one in here is a Hanukkah menorah
Correct.
in the entrance to the lot.
Yeah. That's correct.
And all the chairs and the windows.
Yeah. You'll definitely notice a design theme here on campus. Hanukkah is pretty important on this campus. Okay. Now, so what we've done, where we left off with our last question is, we now have an explanation for why 1 to 8 versus 8 to 1. The Talmud gives us this as like a matter of which direction the arrows are pointing. We now understand like what's the deeper aspect behind the argument. Potential versus reality. Gevura versus Chesed, that we have. But what we don't have is how the soul roots or worldviews or any type of things fit with the second Yossi in the Talmud. The second Yossi in the Talmud said that really what Shammai and Hillel are arguing about is what biblical precedent are we going to use? Are we going to use the bulls of Sukkot, or are we going to use the principle of going up in holiness versus never going down? Shammai says it's like we use the bulls because they started with a larger number and worked their way down. That's a biblical precedent for how we should do Chanukah. And Hillel is saying, no, we don't use that biblical precedent. Instead, we use biblical concept, which is to go up in holiness. So how does that work? How does that fit according to their soul roots? Okay, now, in order to understand this, that everybody explains, we need to understand from a Hasidic perspective, what is a holiday? Now, a non-Hasidic perspective is that holidays are commemorations of things that happened in the past. It's history. Because something extraordinary happened in the past, then we commemorate that with a holiday going forward. Right? Fair enough to say. In America, we have Independence Day, July 4th, 1776, when the Declaration of Independence, going away from England, when we were able to win a War of Independence, we commemorate that as a holiday looking backwards on history. That's not what a holiday is, according to Chassidus. It's true, all of our holidays are commemorating something historic, but that is not what it's all about, according to Chassidus. Chassidus says what a holiday is all about is the cyclical nature of time. Time has like a circle that goes over and over and over again in a pattern. And there are certain energies which are available at certain times of the year and not so available other times of the year. And when these energies are available, these energies are what are responsible for the initial events that we commemorate. And when the cycle of time repeats itself, when we come to the repeat of this energy, we can tap into it again. So the famous example is the example of the holiday of Passover. Freedom is an energy. The theme of freedom is an energy. There are certain times when we're just able to tap into a force which breaks barriers. So comes the 15th of Nisan, there's an energy in the cycle of time that we can tap into and become more free. So if we use this Hasidic twist on what is a holiday, and we go back to Chanukah, what energy is being revealed on Chanukah that we can tap into over and over and over again? Now this energy, like I said before, the symbolic understanding is that light defeats darkness. Goodness defeats evil. Truth defeats falsehood. All of these concepts. So if there's an energy of light defeating darkness, according to Chassidus, we should be trying to tap into this. We should be right now taking advantage of this unique opportunity to have the energy to overcome darkness. Now, this is a big thing. How do we overcome our own personal darkness? Now, how are we doing on time? Because I have a little bit of a digression. Okay, so digression because it was advertised as the psychology of the Chanukah candles. So the digression is we have two kind of divergent schools of thought in early psychology. In the field of, the relatively early field of psychology, two different divergent schools of thought as to how we deal with personal darkness. Now, I'm going to summarize this concept as one school of thought is Sigmund Freud, the psychologist Sigmund Freud. This is what I said before. I'm just make sure we're caught up in the slides. I was just going over this point about how every holiday has an energy, has a repetitive theme that happens throughout the cycle of time. Chanukah's theme, the energy we tap into, is this idea of light defeating darkness. So what's going on between Hillel and Shammai is what's the best approach to defeating darkness. This is the Hasidic layer of understanding this argument. Now, this is what brings us to Freud and Skinner. So Freud, Sigmund Freud, he represents one side of it, which is he's the father of psychoanalysis. And when I say it's two divergent schools of thought in psychology, you can almost think of it as like directions. If you're encountering personal darkness, challenges, and you're trying to address your challenges, so the school of psychoanalysis says the way to fix your darkness is to get to the root of what bothers you, right? So you have all these repressions and maladaptive behaviors in psychoanalysis. So Freud does things like dream analysis and latent problems you have from your childhood and trying to uncover them through psychotherapy. So the direction is going down to the core of your being to understand the root of your struggle. Now, B.F. Skinner, the other approach, which I also would say you could kind of think of directionally, B.F. Skinner is the father of behavioral psychology. Meaning, don't think too much about the roots of all your problems. The solution to dealing with darkness is all in your behavior. It's all in patterns of behavior. I have here a little video. I think we have time. Yeah. Okay. See how well this works. Last time I
When we think about learning, we often picture students in a classroom or lecture hall, books open on their desks, listening intently to a teacher or professor in the front of the room. But in psychology, learning is something else. To psychologists, learning is a long-term change in behavior that's based on experience. Two of the main types of learning are called classical conditioning and operant or instrumental conditioning. Let's talk about classical conditioning first. In the 1890s, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov did some really famous experiments on dogs. He showed dogs some food and rang a bell at the same time. After a while, the dogs would associate the bell with the food. They would learn that when they heard the bell, they would get fed. Eventually, just ringing the bell made the dogs salivate. They learned to expect food at the sound of a bell. You see, under normal conditions, the sight and smell of food causes a dog to salivate. We call the food an unconditioned stimulus, and we call salivation an unconditioned response. Note you train the dog to salivate over some steak. However, when you pair an unconditioned stimulus like food with something that was previously neutral, like the sound of a bell, that neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. And so classical conditioning was discovered. We see how this works with animals, but how does it work with humans? In exactly the same way. Let's say that one day you go to the doctor to get a shot. She says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit," and then gives you the most painful shot you've ever had. A few weeks later, you go to the dentist for a checkup. He starts to put a mirror in your mouth to examine your teeth, and he says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit." Even though you know the mirror won't hurt, you jump out of the chair and run screaming from the room. When you went to get a shot, the words, "this won't hurt a bit," became a conditioned stimulus when they were paired with the pain of the shot, the unconditioned stimulus, which was followed by your conditioned response of getting the heck out of there. Classical conditioning in action. Operant conditioning explains how consequences lead to changes in voluntary behavior. So how does operant conditioning work? There are two main components in operant conditioning, reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcers make it more likely that you'll do something again, while punishers make it less likely. Reinforcement and punishment can be positive or negative, but this doesn't mean good and bad. Positive means the addition of a stimulus, like getting dessert after you finish your veggies, and negative means the removal of a stimulus, like getting a night of no homework because you did well on an exam. Let's look at an example of operant conditioning. After eating dinner with your family, you'll clear the table and wash the dishes. When you're done, your mom gives you a big hug and says, "Thank you for helping me." In this situation, your mom's response is positive reinforcement if it makes you more likely to repeat the operant response, which is to clear the table and wash the dishes. Operant conditioning is everywhere in our daily lives. There aren't many things we do that haven't been influenced at some point by operant conditioning. We even see operant conditioning in some extraordinary situations. One group of scientists showed the power of operant conditioning by teaching pigeons to be art connoisseurs. Using food as a positive reinforcer, scientists have taught pigeons to select paintings by Monet over those by Picasso. When showed works of other artists, scientists observed stimulus generalization as the pigeons chose the Impressionists over the Cubists. Maybe next they'll condition the pigeons to paint their own masterpieces.
All right, so Freud versus Skinner, and let's go back again. So thinking about it directionally, we're facing darkness. We have this psychological schools of thought. So when facing darkness, facing a challenge, so one approach would say the secret is to go deep into your own core, go deep into your psyche, and unearth the nature of your problem.
With what you've already got there, dig out what you've already got.
Right. Whereas this behavioral approach, this conditioning, would say, forget about what's inside. Let's from the outside in make you better by giving you proper reinforcement. Let's put you in the right circumstances where you'll have positive reinforcement for positive actions, and you'll have negative consequences for negative actions. And if we can align situation from the outside in, we can actually overcome your darkness through conditions.
So you could say, Skinner was saying, changing your behavior or behavioral
Focus
change.
on behavior, right?
Right. Whereas cognitive was inherent cognitive or inherent awareness of what's there.
Right.
Not change, not involving a change.
Right.
Okay.
So, with this little turn into psychology, we could understand that this is what's going on between Hillel and Shammai in the basis of their argument. See, when Hillel and Shammai understand that Chanukah, the festival of lights, not that they're burnt out now, but the festival of lights where we light these candles, isn't just some Israeli victory over the Greeks that we're commemorating, a military victory. This is a theme. This is a cycle and growth and spiritual maturity. This is how light overcomes darkness. So when we have this moment that light can overcome darkness, which direction do we go? Do we go down into the hidden realm, or do we, from the outside, focus on behavior in order to have light overcome darkness? So the Rebbe, the next 11a, b, and c, is all taken from a letter of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which helps kind of pull all these ideas together. Text 11a from Igros Kodesh, it says, for some, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, may have contaminated his inner sanctuary, and he now wishes to purify himself and enter under the canopy of divine grace. According to Beis Shammai, the first thing he must do is move away from negativity and to remove the evil from your midst. When starting out, the evil is at its full strength, and therefore warrants supreme effort and abundant light. As the days progress, the evil decreases and less light is needed. So how do you face the darkness, that we explained? According to Shammai, you're going to need to face the darkness head on, but the most light. 8 candles on the first night, because this is your initial encounter with darkness, you need to have the most light. And as you diminish the darkness, you'll need less and less light as you go. Now, the Rebbe continues and says, an example of this is the sacrifices offered on the days of Sukkot. These sacrifices, and this ties together the Gemara, which we had as an open question before. These sacrifices, the bulls of Sukkot, correspond to the nations of the world. Namely, that the world should not be trapped by their negativity. Rather, they should be transformed to the good. Each day their negativity is diminished through this process of transformation, and thus we no longer need such a large number of sacrifices. As it gets weaker, we'll get by with less and less, because we've taken this approach. Now, Hillel, his approach is different. His approach is, don't start by focusing on the darkness. Don't be a psychoanalyst, Hillel is not with Freud. He's saying the first thing is to focus on behavior. You are doing something positive. You're lighting a candle. Don't reckon with the darkness. Just do something positive. Introduce light. So don't battle the evil from within. Do something in your behavior on the outside, and you'll go from there. So, let's text 11 CS on the same slide. Beis Hillel, however, holds the first one must enter the canopy of holiness, despite the fact that evil is prevalent inside him. He should begin divine service by doing good things. And one mitzvah will then lead to another, ascending in holiness little by little, gaining strength, until the evil is completely eradicated. So, what's the answer? What's the halacha? What's the verdict? As we already know, we've all been lighting it this way our entire life, but now we have a little more appreciation for the meaning behind what we've been doing. The legal opinion, the halacha states, according to Shulchan Aruch, text 12, how many candles should one light? On the first night, 1, and then add 1 each night, finishing with 8 on the final night. Even if there are many members in the house, 1 should not light more. So the law follows Beis Hillel, and it's in our journey here on earth, so to say, it's our response to personal darkness is our main focus has to be on cultivating the good within us. Rather than battling the darkness, cultivating these good behaviors, these positive things. Now, let's say it like this. The challenge is to be out and to be expansive in the world by continuing to add light. See, I say it's a challenge is because you are anxious to do good and add light, and then the world is anxious to respond, and present more and more darkness to deal with. And so what ends up happening is like when you have these competing forces, especially if it feels like the darkness is prevailing over your own personal effort towards light, then you might start to reverse and say that the darkness is within me, and I have to work on that. So the challenge, the Chanukah story is saying is that step by step, when it comes to matters of holiness, we continue to increase, and we have this ability by adding constantly to overcome the darkness. All right. Any questions?
So are all branches of Judaism accepted Hillel's opinion? Every Jew lights 1 to 8?
Yeah. This is right. Regardless of Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Hasidic, not Hasidic, everybody lights this way.
When I was a kid, we always heard that it was the Assyrians that destroyed the temple.
Yeah.
In recent years, everyone says it was the Greeks.
Okay, so let's do a quick history lesson. Hold on, let me just do this real quick.